Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm Milano Shorty, and today we're going to review Killmore from IDW. A company which has not been doing as well as they'd want to recently. They've had to drop a lot of their original stuff, but I will support their original things. These are creators I'm not too familiar with either. Scott Brian Wilson, Mark Allen Fuchs, and Valentina Brisky, and I apologise, I think I may have mispronounced one or two of those names. I do apologise for that one. I don't know too much about them, but I was happy to give something a try because I flipped through it and I thought the artwork was spectacular. I am going to talk about a lot this one, so I might go over my 5 minutes. I do apologise ahead of time for that one. We're going to start with a couple of things in both the art and the writing categories which didn't quite land for me, so I can spend the rest of the review telling you how amazing this book is. We're starting with writing. This is more of a problem with form than the actual writing of it, but it does matter. There's a common comic book thing where people are talking in panel, their conversation carries on even though they're not in panel anymore, and they just have box out text. And they'll usually have like a little Superman logo or a Wonder Woman logo, or maybe a different colour box or a different font for each character. So although we can't hear them, it's a way of visually representing that we recognise different voices when they're talking to each other. We have in this comic book similar kind of happens, but no real differentiation between the characters, and it's not perfect. It's not frustrating to the point that I'm like, God damn, I can't believe they did that, but it could be better. Similar kind of thing with the artwork. It is beautiful in its own way. There's an awful lot of things I really, really like, which we'll get into later. But it also, every once in a while, has a close-up of a human face from an odd angle, and I feel like there's something slightly off about either perspective or the anatomy. It's not breaking my immersion or anything like that, but it just not as good as it could be. But those two things, mildly frustrating, we're not going to stop me enjoying it. On to the things I like now. Let's start with the artwork, since I'm already there. It is beautiful. There is a whole bunch of things they do exceptionally well, some fantastic cityscapes, some fantastic individual character. In fact, the cityscape is actually brilliant because of what it does for the character of the story. This fantastic city with huge near-future skyscrapers, but also in the same city, portrayed in a brilliant three-point perspective, we have more deprivation and run-down areas. But there's also just a sense of general urban blight and decay over everything, and it all adds to what's going on in this world. There's also some really nice choices made in how things are framed, because it's a comic book full of darkness and violence, for reasons we'll get to in a bit, but when we see some of this violence, it is not front and centre, let's revel in it kind of thing. I was reading Batman Gargoyle of Gotham earlier in the week, and that did do that a bit too much for me. This one, there's a fantastic angle, twice I think it happens, where there's a human body who has a brutal violence done to it, but instead of paying attention really to the violence, instead of poking it with a stick like that weird kid who used to have a cat but doesn't anymore, we have it angled so the point of view is from the ground near where the body is, looking up at somebody looking down at the body. So the focus is actually on how the world interacts with this violence. That is a much better way of doing it for me. It adds more to the characters of not only the characters but the story and the world as well. Very clever and doesn't really drag you through the guts of the world in a way that's unpleasant. It just makes sure you know that it's an unpleasant world. In the writing of it, there is so much to like about it. The characterization is fantastic through dialogue and story choices. We get introduced to a lot of characters quite early on where we don't have much time to get to know them in the grand scheme of things because they're setting up an awful lot, but we still get to know who they are and why they do the way they do. But the big bits, the bits which really are fantastic for me is how they do really good analogies for what's going on in the world, because I've seen recently some people talking about this idea of near future dystopic or post-apocalyptic fiction where it's people take the wrong vibes from it. They're like, oh my god, this is just like a horror version of the future. Don't people realize that it's also this bad right now? And that is kind of the point. They're not writing to tell you about how bad the world is going to get. These writers are basically saying the world is bad now. Here we're going to show you an analogy of it so you can understand why it is bad. They do it really well in two particular instances. The first one is basically the city. It's called Colonia, if I remember correctly, and it was a city that was built to create spaceships so people could colonize Mars. But 4 of the 5, shall we say, spaceships have gone. There's still one left. They're not going to build anymore. We're not even sure if that last one's going to go. And the city is falling apart because it no longer has the interest of people going to Mars in it. Now this, is very much just a look at tech bro altruism. This idea that they are there for you and they're going to do what they can to make the world better in every way they can. No, they're not. They care about themselves. They want to get off this stinking planet. They will take advantage of you in any way they absolutely can. They will even build a 5th spaceship they have no intention of sending up to make it look like they're going to come and get you too, and then they'll abandon you because they've never cared about you. Tech bro altruism is this huge thing that's going on at the moment. I've been reading up on it and I've followed a lot of YouTubers talking about it. It is genuinely terrifying, and this comic book kind of nails it in a real interesting way without telling you exactly what's going on. Because again, It's an analogy. It's done really effectively. The other one is more of a bigger thing on just post-apocalyptic or dystopic fiction at all, which is this idea that everyone turns on other people and they're going to be out for themselves. It's not true historically. There's so many records of people actually supporting each other and forming communities and helping so nobody gets left behind. That's not actually usually portrayed in media because we're kind of told that it's like, yeah, it's a bad thing that people do that. And the point is that this is highlighting that it's a bad thing. People shouldn't just be out for themselves. Should ignore the whole bootstraps or I'm all right, screw everyone else kind of attitude, which gets portrayed from governments and media all over the place, because it's all about individualism, and that's a bad thing. Humanity does not work like that. We are social creatures. It's done quite effectively just in how dark and deprived the world is, but its most effective beat is when it's two characters talking to each other, one of whom is leaving the city, the other one is trying to stay behind to try to make it life better for everyone, and how he feels abandoned by this person leaving him. It's far more subtle. It doesn't, again, revel in the horror of the world, but it is still definitely about this. It is fantastic. All these little beats come together to tell a fantastic story that looks outstanding, and I generally can't wait to see what happens for the rest of it. I hope if you go hold to see it in a shop somewhere, you do give it a shot. It's not 100% easy read. It does get to some uncomfortable places, but it does it for good reason, and I can't wait to see what happens. That's it for me for now. It's probably my last review of the week, so I'll see you next week. Until then, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.